only number 9.
This is a marvellous prize. You discover the pleasures of the Pacific's best
I'll let
kept...
her see.
He was the man who made Australia laugh for decades, a master of charm, wit, and television magic. But when the cameras stopped rolling, there was something far more painful lurking behind that iconic smile. What if we told you that Bert Newton, Australia's beloved king of television, battled years of crippling depression that almost no one knew about? Not his audience, not even some of his closest friends. In public, he was radiant, always the gentleman in the sharp suit, cracking perfectly timed jokes beside Graham Kennedy, Don Lane, or hosting Good Morning Australia with that warm, impeccable poise. He embodied the golden age of Australian entertainment, the face, the voice, the comfort of a nation's living room. But privately, behind the curtain, Bert was unraveling. There were silent withdrawals from the spotlight, sudden absences, and unexplained health scares. People speculated, tabloids guessed, but the truth was far more human and heartbreaking. In moments of darkness, he felt invisible in a world that once adored him. He struggled with fading relevance, battled physical ailments, and sank into emotional pits he never dared reveal to the public. It wasn't until his passing that pieces of this hidden story began to surface. Testimonies from friends, subtle admissions from family, and scattered signs from his later years. There was a man behind the laughter who cried in silence, a performer who bore the unbearable alone. Tonight, we revisit the life of Bert Newton, not just the showman, but the soul. The legend who gave us joy while privately enduring the slow fade into his own shadows. This is the untold chapter, the one they never dared televise. Bert Newton wasn't just a television personality. He was the very heartbeat of Australian entertainment for over half a century. From the late 1950s until the early 2000s, his face was omnipresent on screens across the nation. He was television's golden boy, the witty sidekick, the impeccable host, and to many, the last true gentleman of the old showbiz order. Born in 1938 in Fitzroy, Victoria, Albert Watson Newton's journey into broadcasting began as a teenager on Melbourne radio. By the time he was in his 20s, he had already established a remarkable on-air charisma, which soon led him into the experimental and chaotic world of early Australian television. In an era where live TV was often unscripted and raw, Bert's quick wit and charm made him a natural, effortlessly turning awkward silences into punchlines and live blunders into unforgettable moments. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, he rose to superstardom alongside Graham Kennedy and later Don Lane. As co-host of The Don Lane Show, Newton became the beloved straight man to Lane's American energy. Together, they redefined variety television in Australia. Bert was the anchor, the calm, classy presence that could elevate comedy without overshadowing it. He was also a frequent host of the TV Week Logie Awards, becoming a staple of Australian TV culture. But while the nation was laughing with him, a quieter story was forming behind the scenes. The entertainment industry is a cruel master. It celebrates youth, novelty, and reinvention. And for someone like Bert Newton, who had grown up with the medium itself, there was little room to evolve once the golden age of TV began to fade. As the 1990s gave way to a newer, faster media landscape, Newton, though still revered, began to appear less and less frequently. He transitioned to daytime television with Good Morning Australia on Network 10, which sustained his visibility through the 90s, but it lacked the prestige and primetime glamour he once commanded. Behind his impeccable manners and trademark humor, close insiders would later admit that there were signs of a growing inner sadness. Industry pressures, shifting public tastes, and his own personal health struggles began to wear on him. Yet he never publicly complained, never showed bitterness, always the professional, always smiling. It was only later, in fragments and passing admissions, that the truth began to reveal itself. Bert Newton, Australia's most reliable face of joy, had also suffered periods of deep psychological struggle, episodes of withdrawal, depression, and a slow-burning sense of invisibility as the world changed around him. The great irony? The man who brought light into Australian homes for generations was, in many ways, walking through shadows of his own. Bert Newton's ascent was nothing short of meteoric. In the conservative post-war years of the 1950s, when Australia was still finding its own voice in media and culture, Bert emerged as a spark of charisma. At just 15, he was already captivating radio audiences with his warm timbre and sharp wit. But it was television, the newest, most glamorous medium, that would make him a household name. By the late 1950s, Newton was already a star. He became a regular on In Melbourne Tonight, hosted by the irreverent Graham Kennedy. The chemistry between them was electric. Kennedy the anarchist, Newton the composed foil. Their banter was legendary, setting a standard for Australian variety television that has never quite been matched. It wasn't scripted. It was instinctive, alive, real. Audiences adored them. Then came the Don Lane Show in the 1970s, a pinnacle in Newton's career. As co-host, Bert brought his signature grace and timing to the American imported talk format. The show was a massive hit, drawing millions of viewers weekly. Bert's role was often to play the second banana, the gentle target of jokes, but audiences knew he was the glue, the soul, the balance. His humility and generosity on screen allowed others to shine, which in turn made him shine even brighter. Off-screen, Bert's image was spotless. He married the equally glamorous Patty McGrath in 1974, forming one of Australia's most enduring showbiz couples. Together, they became the picture of charm and domestic stability, often appearing in magazines and at public events, smiling, hands held, picture perfect. But beneath the sheen, early signs of personal turbulence began to emerge. In the 1980s, Bert suffered a very public financial collapse. A series of failed investments and unpaid debts left him bankrupt, a deeply humiliating blow for someone known for class and composure. He was forced to start over, rebuilding his reputation and finances from scratch. Remarkably, he did. He bounced back with even more resolve, hosting Good Morning Australia in the 90s and proving he was far from obsolete. Still, the golden age had passed. Television had changed, audiences had changed, and Newton, ever the professional, continued to perform, even as the format around him began to feel out of time. His trademark style, the gentlemanly pause, the old-school showbiz grin, started to seem quaint in a world speeding toward reality TV and celebrity gossip. Then came the first absences. Sick days turned into weeks. Rumors circulated, ill health, exhaustion, creative burnout. The truth was more layered. Bert was dealing with health complications, including diabetes, and these battles took their toll on his energy, his public presence, and perhaps most critically, his sense of identity. For a man who had lived inside the screen, whose entire adult life had been played out before a nation, being off the screen was like fading from existence. He once joked, "If I'm not on television, am I still Bert Newton?" It was meant to draw laughs, but it wasn't really a joke. Over time, those absences grew longer. He made appearances, yes, special tributes, interviews, guest stints, but something was different. He wasn't just older, he was quieter. There was a stillness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, and behind closed doors, something else had taken root. A kind of sadness, a weight, depression. It would remain hidden, unspoken, for years. For decades, Bert Newton carried the mantle of joy. He was the man who could lift a room with a single grin, who made awkward silences disappear on live TV with a clever quip. But behind that disarming smile lay a slow, private descent into emotional darkness, one that only a handful of people ever truly witnessed. In the final years of his career, Bert began to withdraw more frequently. At first, it was attributed to age, to health issues, to the natural slowing down of a long, demanding life in entertainment. But according to close friends and quiet whispers from within his circle, the real battle was internal. Depression had taken hold, not in a loud, dramatic crash, but in a quiet, persistent fog that settled in over time. He didn't speak openly about it. He didn't believe he could. For someone who had spent his life as a national treasure, a beacon of cheer, there was no space to confess pain. As one longtime friend put it, he thought he owed Australia happiness, and when he didn't feel happy, he felt like a fraud. It was during these years that Bert reportedly spent long periods confined to his home, sometimes to his room. He avoided phone calls. He politely declined invitations. And though Patty stood by him unwaveringly, even she hinted, years later, at the emotional distance that had formed. "There were days I didn't know what to say," she once admitted in a quiet interview. He wasn't himself, but he didn't want anyone to see that. Insiders recall that he felt forgotten, not by his fans, who still adored him, but by the industry he gave his life to. As new faces and fast formats replaced the dignified pacing of his era, Bert felt increasingly irrelevant. His style was no longer in vogue. The slow death of his television presence mirrored a deeper loss: his identity as an entertainer. Health issues compounded the mental toll. Diabetes led to circulation problems, which eventually caused the amputation of his leg in 2021. Even then, Bert tried to put on a brave face. He joked with nurses, smiled for cameras when he could, but friends say that the light in his eyes had dimmed. After his death in October 2021, tributes poured in from across the country. Politicians, celebrities, everyday Australians who had grown up with his face in their living rooms. But amid the glowing eulogies, a new conversation began to surface. Quiet revelations from those closest to him began to paint a fuller picture of a man who had suffered in silence, whose mental health had declined in tandem with his public life. A former producer recalled, "He never let us see the cracks, but sometimes you could hear it in the way he paused, in the silence between the jokes." And yet, Bert never wanted pity. He was fiercely proud, determined to remain in the public eye, the Bert Newton everyone knew and loved. But his story, the real one, is richer and more human than any polished tribute. It's a story of a man who gave everything to make others laugh, while carrying a sadness too heavy to share. Australia loved him. But did we ever truly see him? At Aussie Uncovered, we believe that Bert Newton's story is not simply one of stardom and applause, but one of profound humanity. His career was a masterclass in grace under pressure, a delicate balancing act between public joy and private pain. And perhaps that's what makes him so compelling. Even now, he was more than just a television legend. He was a man navigating fame, failure, illness, and invisibility with quiet resilience. It would be easy to remember Bert only as the smiling host, the ever-ready entertainer, the charming straight man to bigger personalities. But that would be doing him, and his legacy, a disservice. Behind the glamour, Bert Newton fought battles we didn't see. He endured emotional isolation, a shifting industry that slowly edged him out, and the quiet torment of losing not only his health, but his place in a world he helped build. Some might say he was a man out of time in his later years, left behind by a system that feeds on novelty. But we see him as a testament to endurance, not the loud, defiant kind, but the quiet sort that keeps showing up, even when no one notices. There's something deeply moving about the fact that Bert never turned bitter. Even in moments of despair, he didn't lash out, didn't demand attention. He maintained the dignity of an old-school entertainer who believed the show must go on, even if it was just for himself. His story also reminds us of something uncomfortable: how easily we forget the ones who once shaped us. How entertainment, with all its glitz and praise, can be a lonely place once the spotlight dims. And how mental health, even in the brightest, most beloved figures, often goes unseen until it's too late. So what is Bert Newton's legacy, really? It's not just the logies, the punchlines, or the golden age of Aussie TV. It's the quiet courage of a man who kept smiling through the silence. It's the complicated truth of someone who gave joy, even when he couldn't feel it himself. And it's the haunting beauty of a life that meant more than the role he played on screen. Now that we've peeled back the curtain, we'd like to ask you, what do you remember about Bert Newton? Was he part of your childhood? Did he make you laugh at the end of a long day? And now, knowing what we know, does that laughter feel different? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Somewhere, in the grainy glow of an old television screen, Bert Newton is still smiling, still delivering the punchline, still making someone somewhere laugh without even trying. That's the strange magic of television. It preserves the image, the voice, the timing. But not always the man behind it. For decades, Bert was more than just a host. He was comfort. He was routine. He was Sunday night in front of the TV with your family, Logie's night with a bowl of popcorn, morning interviews that made you forget you were running late. He wasn't just in our lives. He framed them. And yet, behind all that light was a shadow we didn't see. Or maybe we did, but we looked away. Because it's easier to believe in perfect icons than to confront the idea that even the brightest stars can burn alone. Now that we know what Bert carried, we don't love him less. We love him more. because we finally see him. Not just as the entertainer, but as the human being. Flawed, vulnerable, and yet still standing, still smiling, even when it hurt. In the end, Bert Newton didn't ask for sympathy. He asked only to be remembered for the joy he brought. And that's exactly what we'll do. But perhaps now we remember a little differently, a little deeper, a little sadder, and a little more grateful. Some stories are never told, but now you know. Bert's legacy isn't just about television. It's about endurance, about the quiet cost of laughter, and about a man who gave his light to a country, even as his own began to fade. And for that, we will never forget him.